in the land where our ancestors' footprints still mark the earth, where the great river Niger carries stories older than time itself, there stood the magnificent kingdom of Amudike. And this was no ordinary realm, my children. The palace walls, built with red earth and decorated with intricate carvings that told tales of 100 kings, rose proudly against the backdrop of ancient Iroko trees that touched the heavens themselves. It was in this kingdom that our story begins, during the reign of the mighty King Okonkwo, whose wisdom was said to rival that of the tortoise in our oldest tales. The king's compound was a sight to behold, 7 courtyards, each representing one of the original families of Umudike, connected by pathways paved with smooth stones from the sacred stream. The air always carried the sweet scent of ugba and fresh palm wine, mixed with the aromatic smoke from the evening cooking fires. Among all his blessings, King Okonkwo treasured none more than his daughter, Princess Olayinka. Born when the Hamatan winds were at their gentlest, she came into the world with a half-moon birthmark that the Dibia declared was a sign of great destiny. Her mother, Queen Adanna, had died bringing her into the world, and perhaps it was this early loss that made the king shower his daughter with even more love and attention. Olayinka grew into a beauty that became the subject of praise singers' verses. Her skin glowed like polished ivory, and her walk was so graceful that people said she must have learned it from the antelope spirit. The princess had been raised with the finest education. She could recite the lineage of every important family in the 7 kingdoms. Her fingers moved across the talking drum with the skill of a master griot. But it was not just her beauty or accomplishments that drew people to her. Olayinka had inherited her father's kindness. Every market day, she would sit with the old women selling their wares, listening to their stories and ensuring they had fresh water to drink. Children would run to her, knowing she always carried sweet mangoes in her cloth bag for them. The palace workers spoke of how she treated everyone, from the highest chief to the lowest servant, with the same gentle respect. Yet, as our elders say, a single tree cannot make a forest. Despite all her father's love and the adoration of the kingdom, there was a loneliness in Olayinka's heart that grew deeper with each passing season. She would often stand on her private balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in colours of gold and purple, wondering if there was more to life than the carefully arranged existence within the palace walls. It was during the annual New Yam Festival, when the air was thick with the dust of celebration and the sound of drums filled every corner of the kingdom, that destiny decided to play its hand. Traders from all corners of the land had come to pay tribute to King Okonkwo and participate in the grand market that accompanied the festival. Among them was a young merchant named Obiora, whose arrival would change everything. Unlike the local traders, Obiora carried himself with the mysterious air of a man who had seen distant lands. His wrapper was made of the finest material from the coast, and his hands bore rings that sparkled with stones from the northern mountains. But it was his eyes, dark and deep like wells of ancient wisdom, that caught Olayinka's attention during the festival ceremonies. Obiora had brought rare treasures to trade, delicate coral beads from beyond the great waters, silk wrappers that shimmered like fish scales in the sun, and perfumes that smelled of flowers no one in Umudike had ever seen. But his greatest gift was his tongue, which wove stories as skillfully as a master weaver creates patterns in cloth. Their first real encounter happened in the palace garden, where Olayinka often went to escape the watchful eyes of her father's guards. Obiora had been invited to display his wares to the king, and whether by chance or the mischievous hand of fate, he found himself lost among the flowering Udala trees where the princess was reading. "The flowers are beautiful," he said, his voice carrying the slight accent of the coast, "but they pale next to your radiance, princess." Olayinka should have called for her maidens. She should have maintained the distance that her royal blood demanded. But something in Obiora's voice, in the way his eyes seemed to see past her title to her very soul, made her pause. "Beautiful things often hide thorns," she replied, remembering her father's warnings about smooth-talking strangers. Obiora smiled, and that smile would haunt Olayinka's dreams for years to come. "And sometimes, Princess, it is the thorns that make the flower worth reaching for." That conversation, innocent as the first drops of rain before a storm, marked the beginning of what would become both a blessing and a curse. Over the next few weeks, as the festival continued, Obiora found ways to be near the princess. He would appear in the garden with new stories of his travels, each tale more fascinating than the last. He spoke of cities built on water, of tribes who could talk to birds, of kingdoms where women ruled with wisdom that brought prosperity to all. Olayinka found herself drawn to him like a moth to flame. In Obiora's stories, she saw the world beyond the palace walls, a world of endless possibilities and adventures. When he spoke, the loneliness that had been her constant companion seemed to fade like morning mist under the sun. Their meetings, though brief, were filled with an intensity that made time seem to stand still. Obiora brought her gifts, not the ordinary tributes that filled her chambers, but small, meaningful treasures. A seashell that carried the sound of distant waves, a small carved figurine of a bird in flight, a bracelet of tiny bells that tinkled like falling rain. But it was his words that truly captured her heart. "You are not just a princess," he would say, his voice soft as evening breeze. "You are a woman with fire in her soul and dreams in her heart. Your destiny is not just to be someone's daughter or wife, but to write your own story." The palace gossips, sharp-eyed as hawks, began to notice. Whispers started, like small streams that would soon grow into rivers. The princess was spending too much time in the garden. The foreign trader was seen too often near the palace walls. But love, especially young love, has a way of making one deaf to warning drums. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in farewell colours, Obiora spoke of leaving. The trading season was ending, and the caravans would soon depart for the coastal cities. "Come with me," he whispered, his words carrying the weight of both promise and danger. "There is a whole world waiting to be discovered. We could see it together." Olayinka, her heart racing like a trapped bird, made a decision that would alter not just her life, but the lives of generations to come. Under the cover of darkness, with only the stars as witnesses, she left the palace with nothing but a small bundle of belongings and the dreams Obiora had planted in her heart. Their journey was swift and secret, travelling by night and resting in hidden places by day. Obiora knew paths that avoided the main roads, and for a time it seemed as though they had succeeded in outrunning both tradition and responsibility. But happiness built on unstable ground cannot stand for long. As they reached the outskirts of a coastal town, Olayinka began to feel the first stirrings of life within her womb. When she shared this news with Obiora, expecting joy, she saw something flicker in his eyes, something that looked too much like fear. The change was subtle at first. He became distant, preoccupied with mysterious business that kept him away for longer and longer periods. Then, one morning, Olayinka woke to find him gone. No note, no explanation, no trace of the man who had promised her the world. Only a small pouch of gold coins left beside her sleeping mat told her that this was no temporary absence. Alone in a strange town, carrying a child beneath her heart, Olayinka faced the bitter taste of reality. The coins Obiora had left would not last forever. Her royal upbringing had not prepared her for the harsh world outside the palace walls. Pride prevented her from returning home. How could she face her father with such shame? The months that followed tested every fibre of her being. She found work in a small trading house, her knowledge of valuable goods proving useful. She learned to suppress her royal mannerisms, to blend in with the common people she had once viewed from the elevated position of her palace balcony. But each night, as her child grew within her, she would touch the half-moon birthmark on her shoulder, the mark she had inherited from her own mother, and wonder if she was cursed to bring similar pain to her own child. When the time came for the baby to be born, Olayinka found herself in the care of an old midwife named Mamachika. The labour was long and difficult, but as the first rays of dawn touched the sky, a baby girl's cry filled the small room. The child was beautiful, perfect in every way, and bore the same half-moon birthmark as her mother. For 3 months, Olayinka tried to make it work. She would carry her daughter to work, trying to balance her duties with motherhood. But the whispers followed her everywhere. A single mother, clearly of good breeding but living in poverty, surely there was a story there. The shame she had tried to escape seemed to have followed her, taking on new form. One night, after another day of struggling to feed herself and her child, Olayinka made a decision that would haunt her until her dying day. She wrapped her daughter in her finest wrapper, the last remnant of her royal past, and placed her mother's coral bead bracelet on the tiny wrist. Then, in the darkest hour of the night, she carried her sleeping child to the steps of Mercy Orphanage. "My precious one," she whispered, tears falling on the sleeping infant's face. "May the gods forgive me for what I do. May they guide your path and keep you safe. Perhaps one day, when I have made something of myself, I can return for you." She placed a small pouch containing the last of her gold coins beside the child, along with a note that read simply, "Her name is Adanna, for she is her father's daughter. Please keep her safe." As she turned to walk away, the baby stirred and let out a small cry. Every instinct in Olayinka's body screamed at her to turn back, to pick up her child, to find another way. But shame and fear had built walls around her heart, and she forced herself to keep walking, each step taking her further from her daughter and closer to a future she would build on the foundation of this terrible sacrifice. Olayinka travelled to Onitsha, the great market city, where she reinvented herself. She used her knowledge of trade and her natural grace to secure a position with a wealthy merchant family. Over time, she caught the eye of the merchant's most successful son, Mazi Namdi. He was struck by her unusual refinement and business acumen, never suspecting her royal origins. They married, and Olayinka became a respected trader's wife. She bore Namdi 3 children and built a life of comfort and respectability. To all who knew her, she was the perfect wife and mother, running her household with quiet efficiency and grace. None could have guessed the weight of guilt she carried in her heart. But each night, when the house was quiet and her family slept, Olayinka would stand in her compound, looking up at the same moon that had witnessed her daughter's abandonment. She would touch the half-moon birthmark on her shoulder and wonder if her firstborn daughter was safe, if she was loved, if she would ever forgive her mother for choosing shame over love. 16 rains had fallen since the night Princess Olayinka left her baby at the steps of Mercy Orphanage. 16 cycles of planting and harvest had passed, each season adding new layers to the story of the child who would be known as Adanna. The Steps of Mercy orphanage sat at the edge of Umuahia town, a compound of weathered buildings surrounded by mango and udala trees. It was here that Adanna grew from a helpless infant into a maiden whose beauty carried whispers of royal blood. The coral bead bracelet that had been left with her remained her most precious possession, though she knew nothing of its true significance. Mama Chinye, the elderly matron of the orphanage, had taken special interest in Adanna from the start. Perhaps it was the fine wrapper that baby had been wrapped in, or the unusual birthmark that graced her shoulder like a blessing from the ancestors. Whatever the reason, she made sure the girl learned not just the basic skills needed for survival, but also the deeper wisdom of their people. "Child," Mama Chinua would say while teaching Adanna to pound yam just so, "your hands may work a servant's tasks, but carry yourself like the daughter of a king." We never know what plans the gods have for us. Even as a small child, Adanna showed unusual grace. She moved with a natural dignity that set her apart from the other orphans. When she fetched water from the stream, the other girls would stumble and splash, but Adanna balanced her water pot as if it were filled with gold dust. When she swept the compound, she did it with such care that Mama Chinua would say the ancestors themselves must approve. But life in the orphanage was not easy. Resources were scarce, and all children had to contribute to survive. Adanna learned early to wake before the cocks crow to help in the kitchen, to wash clothes until her fingers were raw, to serve others with a smile even when her own stomach growled with hunger. Yet she never complained. Instead, she would sing. Her voice, sweet as morning dew and strong as the river current, would rise above the compound, carrying songs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her soul. "Mother Moon, hanging high. Watch over me as nights go by. Though my path seems dark and long, keep my spirit brave and strong." As Adanna approached her 16th year, Mama Chinua faced a difficult decision. The orphanage was struggling, with more hungry mouths arriving each month. The older children needed to make way for younger ones, and it was time for Adanna to find her place in the wider world. "My child," Mama Chinua said one evening, her old hands trembling as they plaited Adanna's hair, "I have found a position for you in Onitsha. A wealthy trader's wife needs a housemaid. She is known to be strict but fair, and her compound is well respected. You will have food, shelter, and even a small wage to save." Adanna's heart trembled like a leaf in the Harmattan wind, but she squared her shoulders and nodded. Had not Mama Chinua always taught her that every challenge was an opportunity in disguise? The journey to Anichi was Adanna's first time leaving the only home she had known. The busy market city overwhelmed her senses. The press of crowds, the shouts of traders, the mix of languages and customs from all corners of the land. Her new residence was a grand compound in the merchants' quarter, with high walls and an iron gate that creaked like a grumpy elder when opened. It was here that fate played its crueler hand, for the trader's wife who would be her new mistress was none other than Olayinka and Ole Malanson, her own mother, though neither knew it. The years had changed Olayinka. Gone was the gentle princess who had once shared mangoes with market women. In her place was a hard-eyed madam, whose wealth had not softened the bitterness in her heart. The drumbeats take on a heavier rhythm. From the first day, Olayinka found fault with everything Adanna did. Perhaps it was the girl's grace that irritated her, or the way the coral bead bracelet on her wrist caught the light, a constant reminder of her own past. Whatever the reason, she seemed determined to break Adanna's spirit. "Useless girl," she would shout. "Can't you see the dust on these shelves? Were you raised in a bush?" The irony of her words would have made the gods weep, for she was criticizing the very child she had abandoned to the care of strangers. Adanna's days began long before sunrise. She was the first to wake and the last to sleep, her duties endless as waves on the shore. Dawn, sweep the compound, fetch water from the communal tap, light the kitchen fire. Morning, prepare breakfast for the family, help the children prepare for school, clean the rooms. Afternoon, wash clothes, tend the small vegetable garden, prepare lunch. Evening, clean again, prepare dinner, serve the family, clean the kitchen. Night, prepare the children's uniforms for the next day, ensure all doors were locked. But it was not the work that wore on Adanna's spirit, it was the constant criticism, the deliberate cruelty of her mistress. Olayinka's 3 children were forbidden to speak kindly to her. If they showed her any kindness, their mother would punish them with extra studies or withdrawn privileges. The youngest child, 6-year-old Chioma, once offered Adanna a piece of her birthday cake. Olayinka saw this and threw the cake in the dust, then made Adanna clean it up while the little girl watched, crying. "Never forget your place," Olayinka sneered. "You are here to serve, nothing more." Yet even in this harsh new life, Adanna found small moments of grace. The compound's elderly gardener, Papa Ez, would sometimes share his lunch with her, telling stories of the old days while they ate. The local food seller would slip extra pieces of fish into Adanna's soup when Olayinka wasn't looking. And sometimes, in the quiet of night, she would climb to the roof of the boys' quarters where she slept, letting the cool breeze dry her tears as she sang to the moon. It was during one of these night vigils that she first caught the attention of Prince Ekin of Umileri. The prince, staying in a nearby compound while on business in Onitsha, heard her voice carrying on the night wind. "Like a bird with clipped wings, I dream of open skies. Though chains may bind my feet, my spirit still can rise." The prince was moved by the beauty of her voice and the sadness it carried. Though he could not see her clearly in the darkness, the sound stayed with him, haunting his dreams. But that is a thread of our story that will weave itself in later. Meanwhile, life in the compound grew harder. Olayinka's bitterness seemed to deepen with each passing month. Perhaps it was because her own daughter would have been Adanna's age, or perhaps it was the way her husband, Mazi Numdi, sometimes looked at Adanna with kindness in his eyes. One particular incident marked a turning point. Olayinka had acquired a valuable set of china plates for entertaining important guests. While cleaning them, Adanna's hand slipped, and one plate crashed to the floor. The sound brought Olayinka running, her face dark with rage. "Worthless child," she screamed, raising her hand to strike. "Do you know what these cost? More than your miserable life is worth." But as she swung, Adanna moved with instinctive grace, and in that movement, her wrapper shifted, revealing the half-moon birthmark on her shoulder. Olayinka's hand froze in mid-air, her face suddenly pale as a ghost. That same mark graced her own shoulder, a royal birthmark passed down through generations of her family's line. For a moment, a terrible suspicion flickered in her eyes, but she quickly suppressed it, turning away sharply. "Clean this mess," she snapped, "and the cost of the plate will come from your wages for the next 3 months." That night, Olayinka could not sleep. She paced her room like a caged leopard, haunted by possibilities she dared not consider. The next morning, she was even harder on Adanna, as if trying to prove to herself that this girl could not possibly be the child she had abandoned so long ago.